growing up in South Australia, I was doing some very basic acting courses. And one of the teachers said, there's a stand-up comedy workshop. It's a 10-week course. You should go there. It'll help you with your auditioning process. And I always, around my mates was the funny guy. And I thought, let's see if I can take this to the stage. And I went along and I did the 10-week workshop. And that guy had a comedy club. And at the completion of that, he said, you got a bit of a handle on this. Do you want to get up and do it in front of a live audience?
Wow.
Which was basically like throwing the throwing the slaves into the Roman.
Yeah, that's right.
It was like, and I died a horrible death, which was he said at the time was probably the best thing that ever happened. And so no, I did. So it was kind of it was a 10-week, 3 hours, once a week, workshop. And I have taken some of the concepts from that, but my teacher at the time was more about, old-fashioned lead-up, set-up, punchline gags. That was his style, and that was the style he tried to put into the workshop. That's what he knew, and that's what he wanted to pass on. And essentially, yes, it's great. It works. However, comedy's changed so much. That was a very 1980s kind of style, club comedy. It's much more authentic now. People, the audience, they want to listen to your authenticity. They want to know what your perspective of the world is, what makes you interesting to listen to.
Yeah.
And they try, they want to tap into that. So, one of the things I always say to the students right at the beginning is, what I'm really interested in is what makes you unique and what makes you interesting to listen to, and how do you see the world? What's your perspective on world topics? And the audience love following that and tapping into that. So it has become, in my opinion, comedy's become much more storytelling now than perhaps what it was even when I first started out.
You're absolutely right, and that's interesting, and people find that more easy to relate to as well. But I guess from what I read here too, and it makes perfect sense, and
Yes.
tell me if this is right, your main priority, I guess, with this workshop is, obviously you're talking comedy, but the main thing that anyone getting into it have to learn first up is to have that self-belief, that self-confidence to even get up in front of a crowd and project the right image, to come across confident. And is that the first and perhaps hardest lesson for some people to learn?
Well, correct. It is finding that people say this, and this takes years. I mean, I'll touch on it in the workshop, but
Yep.
It can take years to. You hear people say, or comedians say, "I finally found my voice on stage." I
Yep.
finally found out who I was on stage, and I feel as I found my voice on stage. And what you're saying is 100% correct. Is when you really listen to material, like I sit and I watch a lot of comedy. Some of it's actually not that funny, but they deliver it in such a way that's very engaging, and you're laughing at the mannerisms and probably a bit more stagecraft of the actual performer. So I always think that performance, it's a bit like patting a dog. If the dog smells fear, it'll bark. If the audience smell fear in the performer and they can't relax, they won't laugh. They'll tighten up as well. So you are right. It's kind of that fake it till you make it. If you're having fun, and even if you're making mistakes, if you're having fun on stage, the audience will have fun with you.
Yeah.
And I think, and I think it was probably one of the hardest lessons for myself, early on was actually just having fun with it, going out and, I was so uptight about remembering everything that I was going to say. And mistakes, the audience, it's a bit like a car race. They want to see the odd crash. They don't want to see anyone get hurt, but they want a bit of excitement. So if they know that you've made a mistake and you've seen that, it's you kind of paddling your way out of that, where sometimes the magic comes from.
Yeah, that's interesting. And also, I think it's like any form of performance now. I think you're almost trying to minimize the gap between the person in the audience and the person on stage. I mean, at least theoretically. I mean, the person on stage is obviously, they're up there because they do have a skill that people in the audience don't have. But I think the idea of trying to sort of walk on stage as a performer, whether it be comedy or an actor or whatever, and pretend that you have this God-given talent and you're on a higher plane than everybody else, it doesn't really work anymore. So it's got to be relatable. You've got to sort of feel like he's one of us. He might come down afterwards and have a beer with us, and we'll all get along famously. And
that's correct. Yeah, that's correct. You want to and look, in audience kind of stand-up comedy, you actually want to be 10% underneath the audience. You want to come in underneath them, because one of the things that people will laugh at in the audience is superiority. So they want you to be having a worse day than them. Okay? People, someone in comedy, someone has to get hurt for laughter, and so it's one of those things. If you can be self-deprecating on stage, and your day can be worse, relatable, like you say,